Our next speaker is Professor Oren Barak, who is an associate professor in political science and international relations at the Hebrew University. His research areas include the relationship between the state, society, and security in non-Western settings, with an emphasis on the Middle East. Please, Professor.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me to this conference. I'm going to comment on the policy paper from in two ways, from two angles. One of as a scholar who studies divided societies, Lebanon, Israel, Palestine, and other cases. And the second hat, or so to speak, is someone who has lived in Jerusalem for the past 46 years, which is quite a lot, and has seen many of the processes that took place in the city. And I don't know which one is going to be more emphasized in my talk, but both are there clearly when reading papers and when listening to the speakers here. So personally, I could witness in the last decades the deepening integration of the two parts of the city, of West Jerusalem and East Jerusalem. I think even the terms themselves are less used by people than they used to be before. The attempts to also to insulate East Jerusalem from the West Bank, especially on account of the separation wall or barrier, whatever it's called. I remember the first time I saw it, I was in complete shock. You go in Abu Dis, in the middle of the road, you see a 8-meter high wall. Leaves an enormous impression on someone. That said, I think Jerusalem as a divided city is a fact of life. One needs to acknowledge it. The attempts to divide Jerusalem have failed, at least in the last decades. The Palestinians have used force, have used the peace process, didn't manage to divide the city. Israel, at the same time, did not manage to force itself on the Palestinian part of it to change its identity or demography the way that it wanted. So we have in front of us a divided city, and this needs to be acknowledged and needs to serve as a basis for thinking about the city, including the present, possibly the future, including from a theoretical and comparative perspective, which is what we're doing here in a way. So the first comment that I have after reading the paper is that I sympathize very much with the concerns of the Israeli and Palestinian participants, and I agree, of course, with the recommendations. I embrace them, but I think there is a difference in terms of representation between the two parties. Jews in West Jerusalem feel that they have little to say about the municipal issues, that policies are made above them, beyond them, and they are correct. It's because Jerusalem is a capital, because the national value that it has, the religious issues, and so forth. But they still have some influence over the institutions of the municipality. They have the community councils, which they really vary. I lived in several neighborhoods, and it really varies from one to another. I've seen very efficient, hardworking councils, and I've seen a very poorly organized ones in places where they are non-existent even. So there's a big variation there. Still, Jews have these various avenues. And they also have grassroots initiatives. For example, I've in my youth, I remember the Shabbat Wars, the Sabbath Wars, they were called, to open businesses on Shabbat, on the Sabbath, and they were very successful, open movie theaters and businesses and restaurants and cafes. Some of them died out eventually, but at the time this was a major success. Organizing soccer teams and sports teams, preserving green areas. I mean, some of the initiatives the grassroots initiatives were very successful. The Palestinians don't have neither the formal nor the informal representation. This is at least how I see it, and I think it's reflected in the paper. And the reason is there are boycott of the municipal elections, and all of the members of the municipal council are Jews. And they're not the only community underrepresented, because women too are underrepresented in that community, which has only 6 women out of 31. And if the Palestinians were to vote for the municipal elections, they could have won about 40% or 35-40% of the members, and this would, I think, make a major change in the city. I mean, given that in the last elections, the margin between the two contenders for mayor was very small, a few thousand votes, so they could really make a difference. But this is maybe something very idealistic to think about their participation in the council. And it's not only them, it's actually the government, the Israeli government is making all sorts of pressures to dissuade them from participating in the elections. I actually signed this petition encouraging one of the Palestinian candidates to run for the municipal elections, and about 2 hours after I signed the petition, his candidacy just evaporated. And it was sad because of the pressures that he met from the government, from the municipality, from the tax offices, etc. But if this were to happen, this would have made a major change, I think, in the city. So there is underrepresentation, and the paper is correct in pointing that out, but this is a different kind of underrepresentation, I would argue. Still, this is something that the two communities can unite around and think about, and at least on the more community level or informal way, this is something that they can work together to improve. Again, given the success stories that I've mentioned, some of them, and there are others. The second comment is something that is not mentioned or not emphasized in the paper, is that these two communities are not homogeneous. They're very internally divided. We're not talking about two homogeneous national communities, but very complex communities. The Jewish community has ultra-Orthodox, again, within themselves, very divided among various sub-communities. I ride buses a lot, and when you ride the bus, you see things which you don't when you're busy driving the car and trying to work your way in the endless traffic. So in the bus, you can see through the window the balconies in the religious areas. And I remember before one of the elections, I think it was 96 or 92, the national elections, you could see on one window a poster that says, "God said, do not vote in the elections," or "thou shalt not vote," okay? And in the same building, the next balcony would have a sign, "God says you should vote for Shas," which is the Sephardi religious party. So, I mean, this tells you about the diversity in that community. This is only among the ultra-Orthodox, and I haven't mentioned the national religious and the secular Jews. And if you look at the city council, it has 15 ultra-Orthodox parties, but also another 4 national religious members, and this is also something that is very important when thinking about Jerusalem, because this has an impact on all aspects of living in the city, including planning and also the symbolic aspects of the city. And if you move to the Palestinian community, it's not homogeneous either. We're talking about a very diverse community. And I'm not talking only about Muslims and Christians, but also within the Christian communities, the various communities. And as a teacher at this university, you can see these divisions very well, because you have students from various families and clans, and Armenians and Palestinians and Muslims and Palestinian Christians, and from Jerusalem and from the villages outside Jerusalem, and you could see all these divisions in your class, okay? But this is something very important when you want to think about Jerusalem and the doing things on every level, one could argue. So, and for example, when you're thinking, if one thinks about initiatives to reduce violence on the border areas or the former border areas on the Green Line, one can think about maybe arrangements between ultra-Orthodox and neighborhoods who are right near that line, and maybe Palestinian neighborhoods on the other side of the divide, because this is where some of the friction is and some of the violence erupts, and maybe kind of local, informal arrangements between communities in that area could maybe work. The last point is about maybe common issues to all residents of Jerusalem. Yeah, this is the last point. Okay, so Jerusalem is not only a divided city, but it's a big city. And it's expanding. I remember there was a panel here last year before the municipal elections. We had all 4 candidates, I think there was 4 of them, in those elections, and they competed who would build more in Jerusalem. I said, oh my God, the last thing we need is more buildings and more neighborhoods in Jerusalem, because it's an enormous city. It's the most populated city in Jerusalem, maybe even the largest in terms of its area, and counting. As we speak, there are numerous projects of various sorts throughout the city, and it's becoming unbearable. And here I'm the concerned citizen, okay, the concerned residents. It's become crowded, it's become noisy, it's become dirty. The traffic jams are a very common feature in the city. The public transportation lags years behind these developments. And this is something that maybe unites, like global warming should maybe unite the human race, okay? So this is maybe something that could unite Jerusalemites to think about what kind of Jerusalem they want, not politically only, but also in terms of planning and to make it more livable. Because every year, many, many people that I know personally are leaving the city because of these reasons. So, to end with maybe an optimistic note, again, there are several very successful projects in the western part of the city of grassroots initiatives. I don't know if you know the Emek HaTzvaim, the valley of the Deer Valley, a green area which was supposed to be a neighborhood, and because of local activism became a green area where the deers roam and etc. And I mentioned the soccer teams and the Shabbat issues. So there's an experience of civil society, of successes in that area, and maybe one thing that could be done is to learn from these experiences. What went not what went wrong, but what succeeded. What were the reasons of these local successes, and maybe they can be imitated, emulated, something to learn from in both parts of the city. Okay, so it's not only bleak. We have some good things to think about as well. Thank you very much.